Bonjour, everyone. Hi, this is Neshi Lokotz. Welcome to Communications from Home. It's right here at our business fan page on Facebook, where I do 99.9% of my live streams. Welcome, everybody. Tonight's Tuesday, February 18th, and do we have a show for you? You know, one of the things that I really love about doing my show is I get to talk to some really interesting people, and that's going to be tonight. One of the things that I wanted to share with you before we get started is if you wouldn't mind helping me to sprinkle this as many places as you can, because this interview is really, it's going to be really interesting. And I'm going to do the same thing. There's a bunch of people that have asked me to please send over the shows to them so that they can grab it really, really easily. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send it out to a few people here. And I'm also going to send it over to my personal newsfeed too. There we go. And we're just going to ask them to please join us. There we go. Easy enough to do. You know what? I should probably send it over to my guests page too. There we go. There. That works. Thanks so much for doing that too. And welcome everybody that's in the live chat. We appreciate you being with us this evening. And those that'll be watching the recorded show, thank you too for making time in your day to be able to join us by the recorded show. We really appreciate it. And so, hey, Barbara's in the house already. Hi, Barbara. Okay, so tonight's show. Have you ever used a map of any kind? Do you remember in the old days, not too long ago, the only way to get from point A to point B and you didn't know where you were going was to pull out an old-fashioned road map? Do you remember doing that? Yeah, we never could get those things folded right back the way they used to be, though. Did you ever notice that? I know. But this is kind of, we're going to be talking about maps tonight. And my guest, he has been helping a great assistance to many, many people, both Native and non-Native, non-Native American and Native American people with his maps. And I interviewed him way back in 2015. September 2nd, to be exact, of 2015. And I have Aaron Carapella back with me this evening so that we can talk about his brand new maps that he has. And that is about Native American inspiring women. So let me tell you just a little bit about Aaron, okay? So Aaron Carapella, he grew up in Orange County, California. And he was always intrigued by his Oklahoma Cherokee roots. As a kid, he began reading about Native American history and attending powwows as well. During his teenage years, he got involved with the Native American Indian movement and also the Native American communities. So he was working in areas such as the federal recognition for I hope I'm going to pronounce this right, Ajakman and Gabrieno peoples of Orange County, helping to fight racist mascots, bringing Native-friendly curriculum to local schools, and also he joined the American Indian movement, going into land occupations, protests, city hall meetings, and many more things. He also worked on a homemade map. By hand, he did this, reflecting on the many tribes as he found out about. He was using their traditional names rather than the more commonly known names. And then he also traveled to these places. So he's lived in many places across the United States, traveling to about 300 Native communities over his lifetime. Holy smokes, that's a lot, isn't it? He says that this is what we're going to be talking about tonight, okay? He recently released a tribal map about inspirational Native American women. That's just been recent. The very first map that he released was back in 2012. I happen to have one of those maps, I think. And since then, since 2012, he's created over 150 maps of the nations of the Western Hemisphere. That's a lot. That's a lot. And some of you may remember that very first interview that I did with Aaron, because some of you were there for that. We were on Block Talk Radio at the time. And in fact, one of the things that I have for you this evening to share with you is we have the link to that particular interview. And so that after this show, if you'd like, you can always use that link and listen to the very first interview that Aaron and I did together. Yeah, so I think what we're going to do is we're going to bring Aaron on if he's back. I asked him if he could go and get one of his maps for us. I don't know. If he's not back, we can talk a little bit.
Yep, I'm here.
You're here. Yay. Welcome to the show, Aaron. It's good to have you back. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have to say thank you to you. Now, a lot of my audience, you know, they've seen the post that I think both of us put up about your newest map. And I do want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of that.
Oh yeah. I'm so glad to have you featured on one. That's great.
Oh my gosh. And I think I downloaded one of the pictures that you shared on Facebook. Rob, if we can bring that particular one up, it's the picture of me on the back of the map. Just in case somebody missed it. There it is. We'll give it a solo.
Yep.
That's it. I've got so many questions for you, Aaron, but I want everybody to see this. This is the newest map Aaron has created and ready to be released, is it? Yeah. Very good. Thank you, Rob. Thank you so much. So, Aaron, you've been busy, guy. You've been a busy man.
Yeah.
Now,
A
little bit. Now, in your bio, you say that you have about 150 maps.
Correct.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Well, some of those are like regional breakdowns of larger areas. So, like for example, I have a South American tribal map, but of course, South America is a massive area, right? So, as a result, I started thinking after getting feedback from, like, let's say Peruvian Americans who live here, but their family comes from Peru or Chile or what have you. And they said, wouldn't it be neat if, do you have a map just of like the nation of Peru and its indigenous peoples? So I thought quickly about how many dozens of countries are just in South America, but I kind of started on this new venture where and imagine like the border of Peru or Brazil, how it borders other nations. So making sure that when I separate that map, that I'm still making sure I've got all the border tribes along the modern geopolitical borders that cross from, let's say, Peru and Brazil, or historically lived in both nations that we think today. So so there, right there, there's 15 or 20 maps that came from that larger map. So, but I've also done some custom maps. Some of the funner maps or most intriguing maps to me, besides these recent ones about inspirational Native women, have been recently. I did one for the Western Shoshone people. They call their homeland Newe Segovia, and they are very intricately tied to all of the land that is mostly Nevada, parts of Utah, parts of California. And they wanted a map just of their peoples, historical peoples, plus modern reservations, and kind of contrasting the two and showing where they live in contrast to where they lived historically, and also some natural features that are important to their tribe. And so that was a really neat thing to do, like a real regionalized map for a specific people. And now they're using that in workshops and traveling the country, talking about and another recent one that I did was one for the the All Pueblo Governors Council. They
Mhm.
asked me to do a map of the 19 modern pueblos, as well as the Hopi
Uh-huh.
and the Tigua Isleta del Sur Pueblo in near El Paso, Texas,
Right.
because they wanted to link those peoples to their historical
Oh,
pueblo like overview.
right.
So that's some of the fun I've been doing in the
Oh my
past
gosh.
many years.
Oh, and yeah, it's hugely educational for a lot of people, but I bet you anything you learn loads too at the same time. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, there's the general information, but when you get to those really specific areas,
Hmm.
and to be able to work in detail, you
Hmm.
probably have learned a lot more about those indigenous people in those areas than you knew before.
Yeah, most definitely. When I was doing the Pueblo map, I learned how each Pueblo has certain colors that are special to them. And so
Mhm.
I got deeply immersed myself into which colors the, you know, let's say the like Santo Domingo, that Pueblo, why those are special to them, and as a result, why they make certain art that they make
Mhm.
with certain designs or color patterns,
Right.
and then that sometimes ties into their local language and how it differs from one pueblo over.
Right.
So there's a lot of information to learn. And another quick example of that is when I was doing the map of South America. I learned I had to do I do these maps putting the tribes in their historical centralized location.
Mhm.
But of course, after the Spaniards and the Portuguese came, a lot of those tribes were displaced.
Right.
So working backwards through history to say like, okay, the tribes along the east coast of Brazil, many of them wound up in the middle of the Amazon
Mhm.
hundreds of years later, and so they live 1,000 miles or 1,500 miles from their historic location.
Right.
So just stuff like that is very very interesting.
Yeah.
Also, World War II, because of the need for rubber for
Mm.
the war for
Right.
the war effort, um, that immensely displaced South American tribes because the rubber trees of South America um, were needed for the war effort,
Mhm.
and as a result, people moved into the Amazon and displaced probably a couple hundred tribes, and about 1 million people died as a
Oh
result of
my
that,
God.
indigenous people. And
Right.
that's one of the things you don't think about. In
No.
the 19 in
So
the
many.
1940s, about 1 million indigenous people were killed by effectively colonizers who
Mhm.
deliberately stole their land.
Right.
So it kind of keeps things interesting for me for sure.
Well, there's a lot of history there. It's a lot of history, and a history that most of us have never heard that occurred, right? And I know that how you even got interested in the making of maps. That
Hmm.
kind of ties into how you even got started, right? And so there's some people in our audience, I'm sure, haven't heard that story. Would you mind telling us how you got started? I love that story.
On the maps themselves,
On the
on the
maps
on the concept.
themselves. Way back
Well,
when.
yeah. Okay, so I was born in California, although my parents weren't from there originally, but I grew up there, and there are a lot of tribes that were missionized by the Spaniards in the 1700s, and the coastal tribes in California were almost all displaced to the point and colonized to the point where um, they no longer have federal recognition. So as a result, there's a lot of people who are tribal descendants that live in areas like Orange County, Los Angeles, San Diego, all the way up the coast of California, that are living, breathing native people who have their culture or vestiges of it, but they don't always um, they don't always have that recognition. Not only literal federal recognition, but they usually are left off of tribal maps. And that kind of impressed upon me, when I would see maps of the United States and the tribes that were supposedly native to this country, when I would go to powwows or even Native American museums or
Mhm.
exhibits about Native Americans, I would notice that those tribes from where I lived were always left off the map. And so I'm not sure if that makes sense, but that was kind of the impetus that drove me to want to find maps. Took over many years. I looked for maps um, that would include like the Ahachiman, the Chumash, the
Mhm.
Ohlone, tribes like that, and it's almost non-existent to find one like that,
Right.
especially using their real names.
Mhm.
And as a result of that, I decided, okay, well, when I was about 17 or 18, I decided, okay, well, I'm just going to make my own map. I'm sure someone's done it out there,
Yeah.
but I'm going to do my own anyway. So I just started hand drawing uh, a map on 4 poster boards that I pieced together and put on my wall. And I just started adding in the tribes that I already knew, um, and writing them down. And just off the top of my head, I knew probably 100 tribes, real names, where they were. I felt confident enough to put where they were from. And I worked on that for about 13 or 14 years until in 2012, I copywrote my first map, the Native American Nations map of just the lower 48 United States. And I copywrote that with the U.S. Copyright Office, and thinking that would be the only map I ever would make. And they have now turned into many, many dozens.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's the gist of it.
Wow. I love that story. Rob, can you bring me back up, please? This takes a second. I love that story. And the reason why I do is because um, as Native people, and we never really got to see, at least in my childhood, never got to see um, correct placement of people, using um, tribal names that were mistranslated,
Mm-hmm.
misused, and that
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing. And so I remember when I saw your very first one, I think it was on Facebook, when you put it out there, and I was so excited about it. It's like, I got to talk to this guy. And so because of what you do, so many more people are beginning to understand the native people here on Turtle Island and in the Americas. We'll just put it in on this side of the hemisphere. And that is, I'm thinking about not north and south, but east and west hemisphere. So yeah, it's because many times on my shows, Erin, I will share with people about, like, when I'm talking about the medicine wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, that there's so many different um, traditions around the medicine wheel. Mine is not the only one. And I let them know that there's, what is there, 367 now federally recognized tribes? Is it
I think
67?
it's 567.
Federally recognized? Wow.
Yeah,
Okay. And
567.
yeah, and so anyway, it has, most people don't even know that, or the number, and I let them know that that's just a small number compared to who's really out there, because there's
Yeah,
many more people who don't have that designation, but that doesn't make them any less Native American, Indigenous.
yeah. Like I've read the Bureau of Indian Affairs will analyze petitions from tribes that are vying for federal recognition.
Right.
Sometimes they have state recognition, or they don't even have that. And there's a specific branch of the BIA called the Office of Federal Recognition,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a lot of like genealogists working for them, and um, lawyers, and it's a whole entity of the BIA that a lot of people never hear about, but they are the people that essentially do the backbreaking work of deciding whether or not a tribe
The criteria.
deserves recognition based on the criteria.
Mm-hmm.
And I've read some of these reports that are like 100 or 200 pages long, and in one report they can just essentially kill an entire tribe in their analysis. And
Mm-hmm.
they even admit in some of these reports that there are descendants on the rosters of these tribes that are legitimate descendants, but they'll, through different means of looking at the criteria from certain vantage points, they make a decision that this tribe is no longer is defunct as an existing people,
Right.
and it's a really sad thing to read because it's very it's one of those things. It's you got to get real deep in the weeds to understand what they're
Mm-hmm.
doing through these documents, but
Right.
it's essentially it's essentially committing genocide modern day of peoples who are here.
Right.
For example, the Tongva people, the Ahachiman and Tongva of Orange County in LA, there's probably about 10,000
Mm-hmm.
people
Mm-hmm.
descended from a people that once were probably a couple 100,000 people,
Right.
but nonetheless, that's a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
and they're easily written off,
Right. Right. Right.
through these very bureaucratic processes, whereas other tribes enjoy full federal sovereignty and recognition, and it's just interesting how it's all played out historically, and a lot
Yeah.
of it has to do with who was colonized first. If you
Right.
if you look along the East Coast, a lot of the East Coast and West Coast tribes
Right.
are not recognized because they were first impact nations, and
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like the tribes in the interior part of the United States were almost it was almost like a buffer. And
Mm-hmm.
I've heard tribes like along the East Coast refer to themselves as first contact, and like the people who stopped who allowed the tribes west of them to survive. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it's almost like they took the brunt on
Yeah.
in order so there are still full bloods and language speakers
Mm-hmm.
that existed in the interior part. But
Mm.
anyways, I can talk a lot about this subject.
Well, you know a lot, and the thing is that what I'd like our audience to know about that. Why is it important? The reason why it's important is because even though this is just my 2 cents, even though we have a governmental entity saying yay or nay to who is native and who is not, doesn't make those people less native. They're still native, even though the federal government may say that they're not. They sometimes their language maybe might not be completely intact, but it's still there, right?
Hmm.
And Aaron, I meet all kinds of people, and so many times I have people coming up to me and they say, I'm Native American. I didn't grow up with with the people because, maybe their parents split up and they lived with a parent that was non-native, and they didn't get to know their native relatives and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
And so they're kind of removed from it, and they're searching for who they are, right?
Hmm.
And one of the things that I think that you help with is for people to connect through the maps, because they've heard maybe some stories. Maybe they heard, maybe, my dad was Chumash or my mom was Chumash, but I don't know them. But here they are on the map.
Right.
And so there is a sense of belonging, or a sense of connection. And I
Yeah.
think that is huge for the receiver of that.
Well, yeah, I come across all kinds of people as well, that
Mhm.
contact me because of the maps and from all different perspectives. Sometimes I get, Nazis and KKK members that attack my maps because they don't want a visual representation of what
Mhm.
they know is true.
Mhm.
Sometimes I get that. And so I've I've had very antagonistic conversations, usually from their side, but I've also come to a place of learning with some of those people, which is incredible.
Mhm.
Um, and then I've also had people that say, "I'm not sure how to get enrolled with my tribe, but this is my grandparent,
Yeah.
or this is where I come from." And sometimes a few people have actually gotten enrolled with their tribe because I just quickly Googled the enrollment office number for whatever tribe they're from and said, "Call this number. You might be eligible." And
Yeah.
a few months later, a year later, they'll contact me and say, "Hey, I'm an enrolled tribal member. I would have never known what to do. I just happened upon your maps and then contacted you." And
Mhm.
that's not even really in my purview to like be helping
Right.
people with genealogy.
Right. Right.
That's not my specialty. but I figured if I can just be a conduit for that small little process,
Mm-hmm.
so that's been really interesting.
Yeah.
And I'd like to hope that my maps are one piece. I mean, I appreciate all the praise you give me for the maps,
Yeah.
and it's been a real blessing for me to work on these. But I also feel like as a former really hardcore activist who was out there in the trenches at places kind of like Standing Rock
Oh, yeah.
before we had Standing Rocks,
Yep.
the real
Yes.
small occupations where there'd be 100 of us out in the middle of the desert or something, and I think, man, I'm one piece of a very large puzzle, and we may not even win this fight, but at
Right.
least we're here.
Right.
And I kind of see the maps that way. I kind of, having had done that as a real youngster, I always felt like I use this analogy a lot. Like I felt like I was rattling the cage,
Yeah.
trying to get these people, these non-Indians, to understand Native people
Right.
and respect whatever we were there
Mm-hmm.
representing.
Right.
And now it's interesting because I'll have phone conversations with like school superintendents and principals and curriculum directors, and I'm thinking like, wow, that's a big turn of events. I I used to be at City Hall disrupting, their award ceremonies, and now I'm talking to the superintendent himself. So,
Yeah.
um, but it's a good transition. I feel like it's been a good like trajectory through my
Mm-hmm.
life. You know, learning as much as I could, reading thousands of books on Native people, going to hundreds of places. I've been to I've been to a lot of places like massacre sites and village
Mm-hmm.
sites and historic battlefields and sacred places, and it's just part of the journey.
It
We kind
is.
of move into different phases throughout our life.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you feel that way, but
Yes, I do. I do. And I also believe that everything that we experience from the time we're babies until the time we take our last breath has everything to do with what we're meant to do here, right? Sometimes we
mm,
might feel like we're, off in the weeds sometimes, and other times we're right on the road. Doesn't matter. Every experience that we have goes to our soul and the growth of our soul. And so,
mm,
I can see, when you're telling your stories about how you got started and when you were a small child and seeing and what you did in the protesting and the sit-ins and to the point of now your maps are in places of education.
hmm
And you're also giving something to your sons, right?
right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, my 6-year-old, he just turned 6. His name is Sequoia,
Hmm.
and they ask him in school, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he says, I want to make maps like my dad.
Oh my God.
So he may or may not carry it on, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
And my little boy, he's 8 months old, and he already, when he sees a map, his eyes light up in a different way than if he's seeing something else. Like he's already recognizing what he's going to
Yeah.
be surrounded by.
Right. 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 Well, he probably feels your, I'll call it energy, right? How you feel about the maps. And so, he gets to feel you about it and
Mhm.
connects the maps with you, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that makes
yeah,
sense.
it makes sense. Now, gosh, I have so many questions for you, and they're all kind of colliding in my head. One of the things that I do want to talk about your newest map, but I want to save that just for
Okay.
a little bit
hmm
because I think that there's some things that our audience may not know that you've done with the maps, which is, I think, extremely helpful. And that is, you have maps about the pipelines and where they
Right,
cross through native countries, right?
right.
What has been how is that going? Because those things must get sold a lot, I would think.
Yeah, well, interestingly, that's the one map that I actually have given out to the public for free. I
Oh,
don't
good.
own the copyright to that map.
Oh, okay, good.
Um, created that, I think, in 2016 was when Standing Rock was happening, right?
Mhm.
Man,
Right,
it's already been
right.
4 years since
I
that
know,
happened.
right?
I
I know.
can't believe it. But
Wait a minute, you were there, right? At Standing Rock?
no, I didn't go there.
You
I
didn't.
went. I was referring to when I was an activist in like the 90s and
Yeah.
early 2000s.
Pre-Standing Rock. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
we never saw anything that big, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but anyways, yeah. So when that happened, I thought immediately I went to my activist mode, you
Hmm.
know, because I had been at places like that, and I thought and I knew this is one pipeline, this is one battle, you know, this is one tribe or
Hmm.
a few tribes dealing with one issue in one localized place, and we know this is happening all across the land.
Right.
And so I started just doing some basic research, you know, what other I knew right here in Oklahoma there's the Diamond pipeline that
Hmm.
cuts across the state.
Right.
And you know, there were activist natives and non-natives here in Oklahoma, not too far from where I live here, that were, you know, sitting in and blocking certain sections of that from being created, and um, you know, going to Oklahoma City and talking to the governor about it. And there were some success stories because of that. But at any rate, there are always hundreds of pipelines, you know, being created or proposed. And
Hmm.
I thought, we can't deal with pipelines that are already existing. So, but what can we do? We can do like what they're doing in Standing Rock, which is go after the ones they're proposing before they even get to the development stage.
Hmm.
And um, these companies, you know, they have to divulge where their pipeline projects are proposed to be set up.
Hmm.
And so I thought I'll just use their information and transpose it onto our traditional territories.
Right.
And so I made a map of North America. You can download that for free,
Hmm.
if you can find a place to print it out for free or do it yourself. I do sell that map for people that just don't have access to a printer or something like
Right.
that,
Yeah.
because that map is a real large wall map. It's like 48 by 54 inches.
Hmm.
But I thought, hey, isn't this cool? You know, I don't want to come off as profiteering off of Standing Rock, but I do want to show people and have this resource
Yes.
available. So
To have
yeah,
the visual.
yeah, and a lot of people have sent me pictures of their map that they printed out themselves, like
Mhm.
hanging in a college or something, you know.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
thought that's so cool. Or
Oh, yeah.
they use it for seminars, you know,
Mm.
workshops, and
Yeah.
just kind of making people aware that
Mhm.
there's like a there are multi-pronged issues going on simultaneously all over the place.
All the time. Now,
Hmm.
I spent one long weekend at Standing Rock, and because
Wow.
I might as well be there because physically, because all of but the physical me was there, and so,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I used this platform,
Hmm.
to share about information and sharing our audience, what because we have a lot of both native and non-native in our community here at Star Nations, and so just sharing about it. And I know that many of our audience, no matter where they were at, and a lot of people are in Michigan. In fact, Rob, who's producing the show tonight for us, they did in their own backyards. They went to their courthouses. They had, the groups that were putting together um, protests in their own towns because, well, whether it was funding, banks, those kinds of
Hmm.
things, and so
Yeah.
the reach was a lot farther than I think a lot of people gave, even thought it was, right?
Yeah.
And so to have a map that literally give them a visual, but where these are running through or where they could run through,
Hmm.
right, was really helpful. And I have to say, when you were explaining, sharing about seeing, a picture being taken about the map being, it's kind of like I had this image of, like being, when singers, when they have, a hit tune and they're out there on stage and they're singing, and the crowd, a huge crowd, is singing the lyrics back to them.
Uh-huh.
That's a
Yeah.
huge feeling for them because that this rapport that they have. That's very similar to be able to see one of your maps, get hung up because there's educators, there's students, college students, they're using it in a good way, right? It's got to be similar.
Yeah. It makes me want to take a road trip that would probably take years, but just like travel all over, finding anywhere where there's a map hanging, and then
Right.
talking to that person
Right.
about who might have interacted with it or
Right.
how it got to be there,
Right.
So
So
I've had friends who are like in a diner in the middle of Colorado in a small town, and there's one of my maps on the wall, in some of the most remote, random places. And I'm like, I want to know who this person is and how
yeah,
they got it, and
yeah. Their story. How did
it's-
they were interested in, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
And
then
so
you'd have
it's
to
neat.
come to Toma, Wisconsin then. You'd
Yeah.
have to come to my town that I live in because I have the map,
Mhm.
the map, up at
Nice.
the academy, Star Nations Academy, the school that we
Mhm.
have for our classes, and I had it framed, and it's hanging up on the wall. And whenever we have classes, people come in and they stand there and they look at it and they stare at it and they're talking about, did you see this? Did you see that? And that's over here. And yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, I put a couple maps for you that you're featured on. I sent a
oh,
couple of those to you, so they may not have arrived yet.
no,
I
not yet,
guess they haven't.
not yet.
They should be arriving probably this week to
Oh,
you.
good,
So
yay.
if you want to replace that one with one of the new ones,
No, no,
because
no. We'll get the new one framed. We're gonna keep that other one up. Yeah, that's the very first one I ever got from you. So,
that's
um,
probably that's probably pretty outdated too, because over time, the
it is.
U.S. map,
Yeah,
it's called the Native American
yeah,
Nations map, that
it is.
originally had about 550
Mm-hmm.
historical peoples on it, and
Yeah.
now that map has over 1,000 on it.
So
So
it is really
it's
outdated.
just, yeah, it's grown.
All
So
right. So, hmm,
I wanted to add too.
yeah.
I think you've seen this before. I've had critics or people that are just genuinely want to help, um, that have pointed out errors that I've had on my maps before, and that's been a huge, huge part of this process,
Mm-hmm.
is being able to recognize that, you know, people pointing out errors to me or pointing out how I can expand more bands, of one tribe into an area. And I've had to really keep an open mind to that, because these aren't my histories. These are histories of very unique peoples.
Right.
And I happen to descend from one of those peoples. And so
Yeah.
I've had some run-ins and I've had some real educational experiences. And thankfully, I think just over time, the maps are starting to speak for themselves.
Right.
I rarely do interviews anymore, or, you
Really?
know,
Yeah.
do things like that,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like, um, sometimes the focus is more on me than what is represented in the maps. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I really appreciate being on your show here tonight,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
in general, I've kind of pulled back and
Yeah.
just, I want the maps to speak for themselves,
Right.
and to take a face away from,
Right.
um, histories that have nothing to do with me personally.
Right.
I just try to put them all on a platform, you know?
Right. 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 And and I so get that. I do. Um, See, one of the things that we talk a lot about here at Star Nations is how we use our gifts that were given to us by the Creator. And each
Mm,
one of us have unique gifts that we came in with, right? And anytime that we are using our gifts is when our soul is being expressed through those gifts, right? And so I have to say that your expression of the work that you do comes through the maps. And that is one of the things that why I feel that the maps are important, because you've been able to touch a whole lot of people through the maps. And so I understand how you want the maps to be more in front of you than you in front of the
mhm.
map, right?
A good way to put it.
Right? Yeah. So, your gifts and your talent, your education, is all behind that map.
Mm.
So, yeah, yeah. Without that, the map wouldn't exist, or
So you're saying,
it might exist in a different way, different form.
so live and let be a little bit more, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There you go. God, like I said, I have so many questions for you. Since the last time we talked back in 2015, can you believe that? It's been such a
Yeah,
long time ago.
5 years.
When in those 300 different locations that you've been in,
Hmm.
tribal locations, how many ceremonies have you experienced through those? That's got to be something too.
Yeah, like how many ceremonies have I been invited to?
Experience.
Probably a couple dozen
Yeah.
different tribes ceremonies.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in ceremonies at San Carlos with the Apache people. I've been in Gabrieleño ceremonies,
Mm-hmm.
Lakota ceremonies, you name it,
Yeah.
Um, I'm, it's one of those things. Sometimes you're given gifts, and it's very humbling,
Mm-hmm.
and I just feel real lucky, having grown up really detached from where my grandma and grandpa, who they came from, you know, being a city boy out in California,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's been a real transit, like a real lifetime of learning,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been a blessing. And I've been to a lot of these places I've been to intentionally. Some of them I was there because I was with AIM or
Mm-hmm.
other organizations, and we were called out to defend a piece of land, or called out to, help an elder get from here to there,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and so I've kind of come upon a lot of places really unintentionally, but looking back, I'm like, I was meant to be at that place. I was meant
Mm-hmm.
to know about these things.
Right. Right.
So yeah, and I'm really roughly calculating. I've probably been to about 300, um, visited 300 native communities, some in Canada, a lot in Mexico, some
Mm-hmm.
in the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Most of the reservations in the United States I've been to. I lived in Hawaii as a kid, and
Yeah.
went to some Hawaiian ceremonies,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and visited with some Hawaiian people, Polynesians, and Taino people in Puerto Rico. I've been to, historic Taino villages that existed before Columbus and
Mm-hmm.
his son came to that area.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, just uh, it's a real niche thing for
Yeah.
people, for mainstream people, for non-Indians to know anything, let alone what we probably know after a lifetime of doing what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Uh, but
Yeah.
it's just a blessing. Some people call me a walking encyclopedia of native vegetation. But it's like I don't have I have a college degree, but it's not in Indian studies or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's more just a business degree. But
Yeah.
sometimes I feel like I should have three or four, Indian education degrees. But it's more like what life experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes, a lot of times we don't use our college degrees in the way that we thought we were going to, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I mean, I would have been a psychologist somewhere sitting in a small room taking notes as somebody's talking,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
Um, so now here's the thing is I want to ask you about what was the creative process? How did you get started on the newest map that you have, which is the inspiring Native American women? How did you even get that idea to do that special map?
Well, I actually have another. I don't know if you saw that. I had another map because I had so many people respond to that, and I wanted to include so many people that I created a second map that's just a poster that is
Yeah.
probably the first map, the first visual that I've created that actually does not contain a map, and it's called Empowered Indigenous Women, and it
Yeah.
includes some Canadian First Nations people
Right.
and some
Yeah.
people from south of the U.S. border. So there's like an overflow map almost, although some really important people are on
Yeah.
there, so it's equally important.
Mhm.
But I've had people um, ask me since the very beginning to make sure that I didn't have a map of just like historic chiefs, Sitting
Oh,
Bull and Chief Joseph, and
yeah.
and I thought that too. I thought that from the very beginning myself. If I'm making a map showing our traditional names and our traditional languages, decolonizing the map,
Yes.
not only geographically, but also using, correct orthographic spellings and correct traditional names that have real meanings behind them. I should also include a variety of people, not just chiefs or not just men, but also, pictures of children and women.
Mm-hmm.
And in an effort to not infringe on copyrights,
Yeah.
I've used mostly historic pictures, and some of those are, Edward Curtis pictures, which he
Mm-hmm.
was kind of a controversial person himself. Um, I've used a lot of pictures that were at least 75 years old, or the photographer had passed away at least 75 years ago. So there's all these rules to that. I didn't want to step on anyone's toes. Um, I also have some, really faint, like I have a picture of Sequoia, the original Cherokee
Yeah.
scholar,
Right.
and my son's named after him, so he's on there. And my nieces are Northern Cheyenne, so I made sure that their great great grandpa is on there. He
Mm-hmm.
fought at the Little Bighorn. So I have some pictures that are on there intentionally, and I have pictures of women and children. But I had a lot of people, some of the critics of my maps, even if they were gracious in the way they were trying to critique them, would say these maps are relegating us to the past.
Mm.
And so I've tried to wrestle with that, because I would say, well, these are historic location maps,
Right.
and if you read the paragraph on the map, it's clear that
Yeah.
this is a period in time. It's
Mm-hmm.
not saying Native people don't exist. So as a result of that feedback, I created the American Indian Reservations map, which
Mm-hmm.
shows modern locations. But of course, over half of Native people are now urban, right? That
Right.
live off reservation.
Mm-hmm.
So I also had a lot of people over the years saying you should include modern people. So I thought recently about doing a Native children's map,
Oh.
like children, living Native kids who are doing really cool things in their
Right.
community.
Right.
And then I started getting feedback from people saying you don't want to put children on a map because they're minors and they really can't. It's kind of like a legal limbo, And I hate to deal with legalese and
Mm-hmm.
worrying about that type of
Yeah.
thing,
Right.
especially with the whole history of treaties and all that, right? It's
Exactly.
kind of like, uh, but then, then I started thinking, women are coming to the forefront,
Mm-hmm.
always have been at the forefront. It's just now mainstream is starting to recognize what Native people have always known,
Right.
that women should take a lead role, and they are just naturally leaders. That a lot of that has been suppressed since the Europeans came over here,
Mm-hmm.
and they would say, well, I don't want to talk to the woman leader of the village. We want to talk to one centralized man that represents all your people,
Mm-hmm.
which really threw our tribes into a hole
Because we didn't have
to
that.
show yeah. And so a lot of people became self-appointed chiefs, or they were
Mm-hmm.
appointed chiefs, and whoever would work more with the government all of a sudden was the leader, that type of thing. And um, a lot of the women chiefs that exist today, or presidents of their tribe, they had to battle through not only running for office, but also battling that historic misunderstanding
Right.
that now is sometimes permeated within the tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've had to decolonize as they're running for office, which must be really difficult, you know.
We can
So,
multitask really well.
yeah, yeah, which proves again why women should have that,
Yeah.
be left alone in that natural position. But
Mm-hmm.
um, at any rate, I've had the idea given to me. I've thought about some concept like this that I would like to explore. And I know personally a lot of the women on the map, maybe a third of them. The other third I knew about, and the other third were suggested by some of the people I knew.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I have on the new map, one of the people that's on there is the lady who started the murdered and missing Indigenous women
Mm-hmm.
organization.
Right.
I mean, that's people like that are on the map, all the way down to people who are, language teachers in their local school,
Yeah.
and which is equally important, if
That's.
not more important. Um, but yeah, the idea kind of came from many, many places, and like
Mm-hmm.
you said, when it's meant to be, creator kind of creates that situation. And
Yeah.
I've been to lots of native schools, native museums, places where there's native exhibits, and you don't normally see. I had never seen a poster just of prominent or inspirational native women,
Right.
and I thought, not only would that be a really cool thing for me to create, and I have them for sale on my website, but as with all my maps, I donate hundreds a year to
Right. Different schools.
anyone
Hmm.
anyone that asks me almost. Um, but I thought, wouldn't it be cool for little Native boys in a tribal school?
Hmm.
That's what I envisioned. To look on a wall and see all of these women that with a bio that's, this long, of all the things that they've attained in their life and the things that they're doing for Native people,
Right.
when there aren't always those role models for them to look up to.
Hmm.
They might open a history book and look at, Sacagawea and Wilma Mankiller and things like that, but I wanted them to see like nothing but that.
Hmm.
You know, you can be inspired by her and her and her.
Right.
I thought it'd be great for Native girls, but also for Native boys to,
Absolutely.
to also feel like,
Yeah.
hey, that was really
Yeah.
the gist of the inspiration behind all of it.
That's good. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to ask Rob. Rob, were you able to get those pictures downloaded? Look at that. He did.
Cool.
Look at that. He did. Native American nations, traditional names and locations. This is one of I think this is the first one, isn't it, Aaron? I don't know if you can see it. All right. He probably can't hear me. Okay. Rob, did we lose Aaron?
He's still here. Can you hear me, Aaron?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I thought we lost you. We're looking at a map. I don't know if you can see it on your phone, Aaron. It's the Native American nations, traditional names and locations map that Rob downloaded from your website, which he's got your website link up. So, for those in our audience, thank you for being with us, by the way. That if you'd like to have more information about Aaron's maps and the different maps that he has, if you're a teacher, these are wonderful maps for your classrooms. You can visit his website and you can get the information from his website. So, thank you, Rob. Takes a second.
Okay.
Technology.
Yeah, it's all
Technology,
right.
man. We were set to do it old school if we had to. Aaron, do you have that map with you?
I do. I've got a couple here, and
Okay.
hopefully we'll be able to see them
Yeah.
okay. This is my original map that I think you kind of referred to,
Yes.
that you may have. So
Rob,
let
can
me
you,
let me
can you take me just a second? Rob, can you make me smaller so we can get the full map in there, please? There we go. Good. We got it.
Yeah. So I'm not sure how much you can see of this.
Well, pretty much. Pretty much all of
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
but this map is of the lower 48 United States, and it's got about 1,010 tribes on it.
Mm-hmm.
Tribes, bands, nations, cultural groups. So there's that one, and then I also do maps like this one. This one is just a regional section of that map. It's the southwest part
Yeah.
of that map.
Yep. Florida,
You know,
Florida-ish area.
yeah, yeah, oh yeah, yeah, southeast,
Yes.
correct.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of the tribes that wound up in Oklahoma, where I live here, are on
Mm-hmm.
this map. These are
Mm-hmm.
the historic locations for them.
Right.
And so I've got regional maps of the whole U.S. and
Yeah.
I've got a lot of times teachers like to contrast the Native American nations map, which shows historic peoples, with the reservation map. And the maps are both the same size. And I've seen teachers like put one on top of the other, and they engage their students with questions like, trace the tribes on this map to where those tribes are today.
Mm-hmm.
And they ask them really poignant questions like, why do these two maps exist like this? What occurred that created this massive disruption of human movement,
Mm-hmm.
and what occurred in those hundreds of years in between.
Yeah.
And so I like to see them being used that way. I've
Yeah.
created a small lesson plan that goes along with those maps too.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of non-native teachers, especially, they're not really sure how to use the map as an educational tool.
Right.
And so the lesson plan I have, a lot of times I spend time on the phone with non-Indian educators who they want to teach this stuff, but they don't even know a whole lot themselves, you know. So they might be reading a novel. Their first experience is reading a novel by a, you know, modern day native author, but they've
Yeah.
read one book, you know.
Yeah.
And, I'd like to put 1,000 books worth of information and
Yeah.
cultural experiences into their brain,
Yeah.
but
Osmosis.
doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's osmosis. But so I've learned kind of over the years how to create little teaching tools or send them to a resource that I know is better than anything I have, or
Right.
send them to someone who has a really good list of native books that they can read in order
Mm-hmm.
to get a real comprehensive, you know,
Right.
chronological idea.
Right.
So,
Right. You know, here in Wisconsin, and we've had this for quite some time. There's curriculum that's available to the public school teachers, and actually, it's also for homeschool parents can actually download it too. The Department of Education worked with um, the Great Lakes Intertribal Council. That's
mhm,
you know they have the presidents of the different. We have seven tribes here in the state that's federally
mhm,
recognized, and they all belong to this council
mhm,
represented on it. And so what they did was they worked with the Department of Education to have a more correct curriculum for to teach the Native American sections. So I,
mhm.
you know, I'm going to check with them to see if they have one of your maps. And have you ever done one of just Wisconsin? If you're breaking them out.
Yeah, I don't have one here right here with me, but I do have a Wisconsin tribal map
Oh, good.
that shows historic tribes of Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And then when I made that map, I I had a reservation map of the whole United States, but I hadn't broken that down to states yet.
Uh,
So I had a lot of people say the tribes in Wisconsin are wrong because you don't have my tribe here, you know,
yeah.
like the Oneida, for example,
Right.
you know.
Mhm. Right.
And so sometimes Oneida tribal members would say, you don't even have my tribe on the map. And
Right.
I'd be like, well, because your people come from New York and maybe upper New York,
Right.
uh, Western New York. And that's what I'm showing, the very fact that our people were pushed around like that. And so now
Mm.
I have a reservation map you can juxtapose next to that
Okay.
that shows the tribes that live here.
Uh-huh.
So, in fact, I've got a video on my website of a teacher named Lucy Burr. She's a
Mhm.
native lady from Wisconsin.
Oh, okay.
Um, there's a video on my website if you find it. It's near the top on my homepage, and
Okay.
it's her talking to her classroom about the tribes in Wisconsin.
Oh
So,
my
kind of,
goodness. I'm going to have to go back and look at that. Speaking
yeah.
of which, we for the audience, we also have a link to a YouTube. It's pretty old video of Aaron. I think that was one of your first ones that you had put out there, but I thought it was still pretty good to let people know about the background and that sort of thing. It's so we have the
Well,
link there if you'd like to. Hmm?
I turned 40 this year, so thank you for aging me. I really appreciate
You're welcome.
that.
You're welcome. I turned 60 in December. So,
Wow, that's
yeah.
unbelievable. I would not have guessed that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yep. That's
Yeah.
me. Um, all right. So I'm just looking at the time and we're almost at the top of the hour. I noticed that there was one question in the audience. There's Barbara wants to know, do you have a book or would you ever consider having a book?
I that is kind of in the works. I want to create an atlas, like a coffee table style atlas book
Mm-hmm.
that measures like, you know, I don't know, 12 inches by 12 inches or something like that,
Right.
that has almost every map in it
Mm-hmm.
with maybe a little chapter about how I um, basically what we just interviewed about, right?
Oh,
It
good.
just gives
Yeah.
the background,
Yeah.
and that that is extremely expensive to do on my own. So I've had some publishers want to publish my books and
Mm-hmm.
or my maps, and my
Yeah.
maps have been in some published works of other people.
Uh-huh.
But I really want to do that. I want to have full color pictures, a real big book so that people can have it in their home or in libraries.
Yeah.
and I'm going to have to self-fund that. And I'm also waiting to see what else maybe get produced out of this project.
Sure. Repurposed.
But,
So,
yeah,
crowdfunding, I'm sure there's a lot of us that would throw some shekels your way, I'm sure.
yeah. I
We
hadn't
encourage.
thought about that avenue. I have a graphic designer who's really great, and he's been with me most of the time here, the past 7 years maybe. And we've already looked into all of the specifications we need to create that book.
Mhm.
But yeah, the funding issue, you know. Um, but yeah,
Don't let that
I
be a block.
imagine in about a year I'll release a book like that.
Oh, good. Well, then, we'll watch for it on Facebook. And I know there's my community here, we love books. And so I'm
Yeah,
sure that there's going to be a few people because that was just one person asking about the book, if
that's
there was
great.
one coming. So,
Yeah, thanks for
um,
the question.
yeah, Erin, how about well, first of all, I want to encourage our audience to visit Erin's website. Like I said, there's lots of information out there for you to peruse. And if you're interested in purchasing a map, there's that. Stephanie, she says, "Do you have a Kickstarter yet?"
I do actually on my website. I have a GoFundMe link for people that want to. I match whatever people donate. I match a map with whatever they donate, and then I send it to underfunded tribal schools.
Mm-hmm.
So if anyone wants to do a donation, I totally appreciate it. And I've been able to send probably about 500 maps to tribal schools and non-Indian teachers as a result of that.
Aw, that's great. I saw that on there, and you know, um, yeah, yeah, I've done that, and I'm just happy that you have a Wisconsin map. That's all I can say.
Yeah, yeah,
Because a
yeah.
lot of people don't even know Wisconsin's part of the United States. They think we're in Canada.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're at the top of the hour, Erin, and well, first of all, sorry guys, but I need to show one more thing. Rob, if you could bring up the picture of that's it. That is in Star Nations magazine. That is the November issue of 2015. And if you'd like to see that article, you can go to themagcloud.com, Star Nations magazine, and you can get the November issue. It's got a whole bunch of stuff in there about Erin, and also I think our first interview is in that article too. So I'm glad I keep all those things. Yeah, it's kind of like a little historical thing that I was wondering what kind of pictures can we show for Erin, and I ran across that and I said, "Oh my gosh, we're gonna have to show that one." 2015 article.
Yeah.
All right, so Erin, we're at the top of the hour. Do you have any parting words for our audience that you'd like to share with them?
I just like to say thank you to all the people listening and that might listen later to the
Mhm.
podcast, right?
Right.
Um, I just really think that something that's always been impressed upon me since I was really young is the importance of educating people. A lot of times we've butted heads with non-natives that don't understand, or even within our own communities, about what it means to be native or what it means to carry on traditions. I hear a lot from non-Indians, why are you stuck in the past?
Mm-hmm.
And I try to explain to them it's no different than having a map of like the Celtic tribes of Great Britain. We still need to know this history, right? And there are still descendants of these peoples here. And I guess there's a lot of negative stuff we can focus on when we're talking about Native history or culture,
Mm-hmm.
um, modern day scenarios, but I think there's a huge resurgence
Mm-hmm.
across tribes,
Yes.
whether they're recognized or not by other people. And we just need to keep that positivity going and
Mm-hmm.
keep learning our languages. I've taught my 6-year-old Cherokee since he was day one, and continue to do that,
Yeah.
and we can no longer uh, hold a grudge against just the colonizers. We also have to do stuff within ourselves to promote that culture, make it living, and not treat our culture like it's we're going to Catholic mass and pulling out Latin once a month.
Yeah.
We need to do this daily.
Right. And so, and just to piggyback on that is for our community here at Star Nations, we talk about ancestors a lot and healing ancestral traumas, right? But our ancestors also gave us wisdom. They gave that to us too. And so whether you're native or non-native, there's there may be an ancestor that you had that was native. And so you have a chance to heal some traumas on both sides of your families, both the colonizers and on the native people, because we walk with that, right? They're in our blood and our bones. And so whenever, it's no small thing that we do when we do our own healing. So I encourage you to do that. Thank you, Aaron, for making time for us this evening and spending some time with us. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing and how the maps are so educational and helping so many people. Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Catchy Miigwech, a very large thank you. Potawatomi. Speaking of Potawatomi, thank you, everybody that is in the live chat. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. And those that'll be watching the video recorded version, thank you so much. Bama Mina, and you guys know what that means in Potawatomi. Until we see each other again. Love you guys.